All right, good job. Welcome. And if you just joined, that was just the feed from main stage there, and you've already found your way. So you followed Lior's instructions well. So welcome. I know we'll have a couple of other people joining us. We were chatting at the beginning. These virtual conferences, sometimes it's a challenge finding your way to the different places. So you are welcome to share screens with us. I know some of you are in busy places, so that's challenging to do, but we'd love to see your faces as well. So I'm excited about this particular session, and I should introduce myself. My name is Angie Redekop. I'm a professor at Ambrose University, and this world of supply chains and social procurement is kind of my world in terms of research. I care a whole lot about this. And the purpose behind this particular session is trying to dig into some industries that are really tough. Oil and gas industry, construction industry, mining industry. I mean, often these are the industries that make the news, sometimes good, sometimes not, in terms of supply chain challenges. But they're industries that are very important to us in Canada and in Alberta. So we have three panel members with us. I'm very excited to have them here. We have I'll go in order of my screen, which I realize is different than your screen, but we have Bill Black here. He is the head of the not the Canadian Construction Association, the Calgary Construction Association, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that. And we have Dinah Acer. Now, Dinah actually is in Spain right now. She is the External Affairs Director for all of Africa for Kinross, a large mining company that's based out of Canada. So Dinah, this is your evening. So thank you for joining our morning. And then Philip Ducharme is with Canadian businesses for, Canadian Companies for Aboriginal Business. I had to think of the acronym. I think of you as CCAB, but Canadian Corporations for Aboriginal Business. And CCAB does do a whole lot of other things as well, but he's specifically going to focus in on the oil and gas sector and some of the work that CCAB does with them. So if you guys just can each take a minute to tell us how, we'll say, supply chains, safe supply chains, social procurement, how does that fit with your role and what you do with your organization? So why don't I reverse the order there? Phil, do you prefer Phil or Philip?
I go with either one. Yeah, I'm fine with either one. Thanks.
Well, we'll go with Philip because our MC we've been calling Phil. So Philip, how does social procurement, specifically in the oil and gas industry, intersect with what you do at CCAB?
For sure, thanks. To begin with, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and now home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Again, Angie, my name is Philip Ducharme, and I'm the Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship with the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. One of the divisions I oversee is called Supply Chain, which is our multi-year Aboriginal procurement strategy. So that strategy, what it is we're trying to include and increase Indigenous procurement in all sectors across the country. Any entity that buys goods or services, we want to ensure that Indigenous people are at the table when there are opportunities coming about. Today, I will be talking more regarding the oil and gas industry, where we've had a lot of success with Indigenous businesses. And I look forward to hearing the dialogue from my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Okay, and Dinah.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dinah Asari. I am External Relations Director with Kinross. Kinross is a gold mining company headquartered in Toronto. We have global operations in the United States, in Russia, in Brazil, in Chile. And for Africa, we're in Mauritania and in Ghana. And we're a gold producing company. And so as External Relations Director, I guess the most relevant part of my work is community relations and how do we procure look from communities and create transparent, attainable opportunities for companies, but also sustainable opportunities. So what we see is that local businesses are part of our legacy, right? So it's how do we ensure that they survive and thrive after our mine life expires, which, you know, it has a finite mine life. And so how do we ensure that these companies live, grow, and diversify after our mining operations are done? And I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists. It's been a really interesting morning so far. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bill, how does supply chains and social procurement intersect with your world?
Well, as president of the Calgary Construction Association, we our membership is comprised of the non-residential sector, commercial with some infrastructure and industrial, but largely commercial construction. And our entire industry is based on procurement. You're procuring services, you're procuring labor, you're procuring materials. You have general contractors who subcontract to trade contractors who then procure from subs, as we call them, as well as many distributors and suppliers of materials. So it's the glue that kind of holds a project together. And we have public procurement on public related projects, and then private procurement. And then probably the most complicated portion is our industry is comprised of very, very large national companies like PCL and you know, PCL, Graham, Ellis Don, large concerns and major contractors on major projects. But our membership also is comprised of two-person owner-operator businesses that are a specialty trade. And so procurement is very different on scale of project, from private through public. And then some of it's very formal and some of it's very informal. So it's quite a complicated world to just call it one word, but that's kind of the scale of the industry.
Thank you. And actually, I'm going to use that to segue just in terms of terminology. When we came up for sort of the name of this morning, it's like, okay, do we call it supply chain? Do we call it social procurement? Broadly, we're trying to cover both. I mean, often when you hear the word supply chain, you kind of think international, you know, what's happening in terms of where raw materials, et cetera, are coming from. Social procurement is often used more to refer to some of the intentional types of things that companies do, like we heard about from Tim in terms of, you know, labor force, buying locally. So we're trying to cover all of that, and for the different industries and the different people that we have involved, this is going to look a little bit different. I mean, Bill's focus is largely regional, largely focused, you know, on Calgary and area. You know, Dinah's business that she's with is global, and then Philip is largely focused on intentional, you know, social Aboriginal procurement in the oil and gas industry. So we're going to get different pictures in here. So I'm going to start with really the same question for each of you, and you can come at it from whatever angle you want. But in all of your industries, there have been key changes in these areas. Like if you look at all of your industries now compared to, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, you know, oil and gas, construction, mining, business practices have changed dramatically. So I'm just wondering if each of you can just highlight a couple of you know, key changes that you've seen in your industries in this area. And Dinah, why don't you go first this time?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Angie. So I guess to prepare for this, we had a few calls internally with supply chain teams in Ghana and in Mauritania, and what we call our LBI team, which is our local business and enterprise team. And that's one of the questions I asked us, like, you know, you guys have been in the business for a while. What is one of the biggest changes that you see? And it was interesting to see because colleagues that had been in the industry for longer all went for HSE, so health, safety, and environment, and how that has influenced how we go about our buying. And one of the points they made was the fact that they're seeing a shift towards maximizing the use of environmental friendly and recyclable products, right? Which is an interesting concept when you're thinking of a mining company. And the point they make is it's whether you're buying the bottles or water bottles for everybody, and it goes through the whole supply chain. So not the big technical equipment, but even in that, they're seeing a shift towards how can we make this, how can we do better, and how can we make our machines better, and so forth. So that was interesting. And then some of the younger members of the team focus on sustainability, which is what happens next. With all of these businesses we're working with, it's, we're getting them to improve their international standards. We're getting them to treat their workforce better. We're trying to explain to them that it's not just about having the lowest cost. And in Ghana and Mauritania, this is a common theme where companies, local companies, their default is, if I'm the cheapest, I'm going to win this contract. And having that dialogue to get them to a place of, how you do your business matters to us as much as how much as the cost has been interesting. And that's one of the biggest shifts we've seen in some of our local companies, is that move away from, let me put in there the lowest cost for my bid, to, what does my global package look like? What am I saying about my HSE standards? What am I saying about how I treat my workforce and how I do my sourcing? And so that's been a really interesting shift. And having a business that's flexible enough that allows us to speak directly with our companies and visit them and allow them to visit us at site and see how we do business has been a difficult conversation with some of the technical folk who just want to focus on their mining and their drilling, but being able to say, we need our suppliers to see what we mean by HSE standards and what we mean by treating the workforce the right way has been an interesting shift as well. And I think one of the presenters talked about changing minds or hearts before you can change minds. And I think that's one of the ways that we've seen that in practice, is when suppliers can see the standards that you're holding them to in practice, it allows them to then go away and implement it in their businesses, right? So in summary, I think sustainability and HSE would be two of the biggest changes that we've seen in Ghana and Mauritania.
Thank you. And tough industry. I mean, anybody can Google it, mining industry, very on the front stage too in the public eye. Bill, what about construction? A highly competitive industry from what I understand. What are you seeing change? I mean, you mentioned big companies and little companies. I imagine there's some differences there in terms of how people can react, but what are you seeing in the industry?
Well, to the point that Dinah made about low price, our industry is almost entirely conditioned that cheap gets the job. And so a large focus of the industry has been, how do I become cheaper than everybody else without going out of business? Which has kind of precipitated what we call a race to the bottom, which has really taken the focus the wrong way. Probably one of the main changes over the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen an increase in more formal procurement. Some of it has been in response to ethics issues that have happened in other parts of the country. Sometimes it has come through just procurement becoming a bigger force within corporations and organizations. And so we've seen probably more of the formal side. And it has a tendency sometimes to not quite understand the industry it's procuring from. And so we often see some procurement practices coming to our industry and we're like, well, we can't respond to that. We can't, that doesn't fit the way we procure, because there's a huge procurement chain from the main contract holder of the general contractor. There's a massive procurement chain that then flows out of that. And so, that creates a few challenges. And in an industry that's geared to focus on how to have the lowest price to get to the table, unfortunately, it hasn't generated necessarily the right behavior. How can I offer more? How can I do more when I'm being forced to basically go up against 20 others in the same scope for the same piece of work? And then just one other thing to add, Our industry responds to a design, a specification, and a contractual barometer set by somebody else. So whatever's drawn, whatever's designed, whatever's specified is what we have to respond with. So that doesn't leave very much room for innovation to bring new ideas to the table, because under many of the formal procurement platforms we have to use, if you cross out a word, you're disqualified. So it doesn't exactly create a highly innovative environment on a big enough scale yet.
Good. I appreciate your honesty there, because it's tough. I'm gonna come back with some more questions on that. But Philip, I guess specifically looking more, I guess, at the social side, the intentional social side, what are you seeing in the oil and gas world in terms of Aboriginal procurement initiatives?
Well, I think things have changed in the last couple of years with the oil and gas, with the downturn in it. But previously to it, I think what was really changing is that Indigenous businesses are being looked at now and they're being recognized. There's been a lot of dialogue between these big corporations with the Indigenous communities. I mean, there has to be more reconciliation efforts put forward. They have to have impact benefit agreements. They have to talk to the stakeholders, the Indigenous people. And then we have the opportunity. So when you talk to these groups and you negotiate with them, you have to, within these agreements, quite often there are targets that are set for procurement. And that's an area where we have been seeing the increase. And I mean, if you look at the Wood Buffalo region in northern Alberta, the Fort McMurray area, you can look at those Indigenous businesses. They started really small and now they're multi-million-dollar companies. And I think that's where there's been changes. And it's not just in the oil and gas sector. I think all over in Canada, they're looking at it even with the federal government. I mean, the minister of PSPC was mandated in December of 2019 to increase Indigenous procurement opportunities for our businesses to 5%, which sort of equates our population in Canada. And again, and Bill talked about some of the tier 2 and tier 3 opportunities earlier. So I think that's coming into effect a lot more too. Some of the bigger corporations do have requests within their RFP saying, how are you going to have Indigenous engagement within this contract if you fulfill this contract? Are you looking at buying goods and services and including Indigenous businesses? So I think it is a real challenge right now, and there's sort of this misconception out there that there aren't Indigenous businesses. But as per the 2016 census, there was over 56,000 Indigenous businesses in Canada. Some of them are small. Again, some of them are just one-person shops, but some of them are multi thousand of employees. You can look at Steel River Group in Calgary, which is based as a group of companies. They've had over 1,500 employees. They're projecting in 2021 to reach $500 million worth of contracts. So, I mean, our businesses have went from really small to really big. And I think that's where the change is happening in Canada right now.
Interesting. And folks on the call, you're welcome to add questions or comments to the chat as well. And I'll be paying attention to that along the way. Philip, I just want to focus in on something that you said. You talked about good things that were happening pre-COVID. I mean, COVID is obviously huge. I think we've seen this particularly in the oil and gas industry. You know, things go up and down. You know, in the down, it's like all those things that are, I guess, seen as would be nice sometimes go by the wayside. What's different, I guess, this time in terms of the cycle? Are you feeling it more in terms of the attention on some of these social type issues? Are you feeling it more than previous downturns?
Well, I think Indigenous businesses have really suffered, as have a lot of other underrepresented groups with the Indigenous with COVID. I mean, if you look at Indigenous business structure as well, a lot of the First Nation ones, I mean, it's hard to get the financing. They don't qualify. A lot of times when business people start their businesses, they use their houses for collateral, whereas Indigenous people that are on First Nations, it's more difficult for them to get it. So COVID has made things really different. And even a lot of the programs that the federal government announced, it took a lot of lobbying on our behalf and other Indigenous groups to make sure that Indigenous businesses, at one time, a lot of the larger businesses are First Nation and community-owned businesses. And when they first started doing these programs to help the businesses, it excluded any type of government entity, and they were treated as government entities. And we had to go back and forth for us to be able to get those. I know that we did a survey at the beginning of COVID, and I think it was like 40% of our businesses were looking at possibly closing shop within 6 months if they didn't get the assistance. There has been some programs. I mean, Indigenous businesses are very resilient, as are a lot of other businesses, but we've always sort of made do with less than some other ones. And I think we are going to get through this economic downturn. I mean, a lot of businesses pivoted. There's some great successes in there as well, with businesses that are going into areas that are needed. And I think that's one of the things that we look at with the Indigenous businesses, is we're looking at anticipating what the future is bringing. They're working together. There's partnerships. I mean, Indigenous businesses are partnering across the country with each other. And I think that's where we're going to become stronger. And I think we will overcome this COVID issue. And just like the oil and gas, just like Alberta's done many, many times with the oil and gas industry, it's a challenge that we have right now, but we're going to overcome and become stronger.
Thank you. And I know that is a challenge with so many oil and gas companies are having trouble, I guess, following through on some of their initiatives. Bill, coming back to you, and we have some questions in the chat related to this too. Can you talk just a little bit more about the procurement piece? We hear social procurement is a thing. We're hearing about that at the City of Calgary level. We're hearing about that elsewhere. Yet you're telling me when construction companies are bidding on these projects, it's still primarily about price. I guess two questions. Are you seeing some changes there in terms of some of these RFP processes focusing a bit more on social? And then two, I guess, what does need to change? These bigger companies that can, whether it be or city or bigger companies that can do more in terms of social procurement, what should they be doing? So is it getting better? And then how could the procurement process be improved from a social perspective?
Well, I think because it is fairly rare for it to feature in a bid as a factor in a bid. A lot of the players in our industry do their own social work as a part of their corporate commitment, whether it's called for in an RFP or not. Our industry has invested hugely in the past in at-risk youth to provide them opportunities to learn a trade and enter the trades. And I mean, Tim Caldwell is kind of your ultimate example of an individual who was at risk, who was provided with a carpentry opportunity and is now the president of an organization. And he, is leading his organization to respond in this way. But it's not often in RFPs. If it is in RFPs, it's most likely to be a box check, because who enforces it after the fact? You can commit to employ a certain number of individuals, but if you are unable to find them, or if they don't necessarily have the qualifications, it needs a much longer term program of seeking those who are looking for opportunities to learn a trade, to learn a profession, to enter the industry. And it's 4 to 6 years for an apprenticeship in some of the trades, etc. You can't solve it on a project. The risk is you hire up, and then after the project's done, you're not necessarily able to maintain what benefits you were able to drive. So it's finding a way. The industry has invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars over the years in Calgary, reaching out to schools, reaching out to Indigenous, new Canadians. Women are sadly underrepresented in our industry. And it's not necessarily through a lack of effort on the part of the industry. It's very hard to solve it one project at a time. It needs an overarching initiative that would continue on an ongoing basis. And that is difficult to fund and resource in a project-based industry, where you might have a 6-month or an 18-month project, then you're done, you're on to a new one. You built a school one year, you build a swimming pool the next year, you build a bridge overpass the next year. Projects are difficult places to make lasting impact without a more overarching approach.
It's interesting. Dinah, kind of coming to you on this idea of an overarching approach. I would say of any industry, probably we have seen big initiatives in the mining world. I think of the World Gold Council, I think of other big players. Is that improving things? I mean, you've got different countries, different interests in Africa. Explain that to us a bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the advantage of associations such as the World Gold Council is in standardizing. It's in standardizing the requirements, right? And so then, for example, in Mauritania, we have businesses that have worked in Ghana now providing services in Mauritania. So we can see the benefits of having that standard requirement. But to Bill's point about aggregated demand, I think trade associations and trade bodies and international ones specifically provide the opportunity for making that long-term investment, right? So if you're a business, a local business, for example, and you know that your service can be used by the telecoms industry or the mining or the oil and gas, having a platform where you can go and see all those opportunities is very helpful, and it allows you to make that longer term investment. So, and if on the same platform you can identify which standards cut across, then you have a bigger and better opportunity, and then you can diversify. And we've seen that happen in Ghana, and slowly we see that happening in Mauritania as well. So if there is, I mean, for example, in Ghana, there's the Invest in Africa, which is a platform that allows you to do that, right? It allows you to see the opportunities in various sectors as a local business, and then allows you to then plan your business to be more sustainable. So yeah.
Thank you. Next question, I guess, is more or less the same for all of you, and maybe we'll start with you, Dinah. In your industry, I mean, we're at Soul Forum, we're mainly hearing about, you know, the companies that are doing better, which is great. We want to tell those stories. But in the mining industry, would you say, you know, most of the companies that you encounter with are trying to do better? Is it a few that are trying to do better? Is it the big companies? Is it small companies? Just kind of give us a sense of what it looks like in your industry.
Sorry, Angie, you cut out for a second. Could you please repeat the question?
Sure. Just wondering, like in the mining industries, is it most companies that are trying to do better and be more responsible? Is it just a couple? Is it the big ones? Is it the small ones? Like who you don't have to give us names, but you know, who's trying to do better here?
I would say there's definitely a big societal push in both of these countries that is driven from the public, and therefore everybody is being forced to do better, right? Because we as a big company are feeling the pressure from government, from society, from our communities to meet these international standards and to responsibly and do the right. For Kinross as a business, I think the tone is set from the top. Our CEO has a great quote about a great thing he says like repeatedly about how it's not only about doing the right thing as a business, but doing the right things as individuals when we come to work. And that underpins a lot of our, it's like the foundation of a lot of our values, right? So as a business, that's there. But in addition, you have your communities that are better informed about international standards, about what good looks like. And they are applying pressure on a lot of businesses. You have governments that have higher expectations as well with the SDGs and all these international standards that they are being held to as well. So I think the context makes everybody push in the same direction. So international companies are, and we're passing it down to local companies and trying in practical ways to get them to audits. I think to Bill's point about who's checking, our LBI teams do quarterly audits. So they are on a quarterly basis checking in with the local companies to say, okay, last quarter when we came, this is the data that we collected on your performance. How are you doing now? Where are the areas that you're struggling, and what is not practical? And what we're finding then is that we're developing as we grow, right? So it's okay, this didn't work. Is there another way you think that we can implement this particular policy? So so to your point, I think it's everybody is what we're seeing in Ghana and in Mauritania is that everybody is trying to change. For some, it's taking a bit longer, understandably, and it goes back to the mindset change, right? So this is traditionally how we've done business. You're asking us to do this in a fundamentally different way, but being able to collaborate, being able to talk through the process and say, this isn't working for us, how about we try it this way? And having that engagement and that dialogue, I think, is definitely helping.
Thank you. Philip, what about, and let's focus in, I guess, on oil and gas companies in Canada, or whatever your frame of reference is there. Are most companies trying to do better? Just a few? I feel like there's probably some variety.
There is some variety, and I think there are some companies that do incredibly well, and they've been making a difference. And again, I think when Dinah talked to it well, it was from the top down. I mean, if you look at Suncor, Mark Little, who's president and CEO right now, he's been very engaged in Indigenous procurement right from the start. I've heard him speak at events where he talked about there was a small janitorial company. They came in at a higher bid, so they didn't get the contract. But he went in and said to his buying people, why did you not give them the contract? I mean, spend that little extra money this time, grow that company, and now that's one of the biggest janitorial companies in the Wood Buffalo region. But again, I think within the oil and gas sector, I mean, there are incredible ones. If you look at Syncrude, 17% of Syncrude spend in 2019 was with Indigenous businesses. Enbridge is making strides. There's all the big players. And I think the trickle down effect is from that, the bigger players, when they start going to their prime vendors and their prime contractors as well, they are asking for that. And again, Bill also talked about there's got to be some checks and balances. I mean, within Canada, it would be great if it's incentivized in some way. And it is happening in some sectors and some industries. I think, like, if you look at them, if they aren't meeting targets, they're not getting allowed to bid on contracts again. In the US, supplier diversity was legislated in 1968 by Richard Nixon. He signed a bill. And again, that made a difference. So that's what's going to be, and I think that's sort of where Canada is leaning towards with the federal government as well. Because I mean, unless it's incentivized, people just say, oh, well, we tried, nothing's happened. And some of these oil and gas companies have shown that by working with the Indigenous businesses, growing the capacity with the Indigenous businesses, having partnerships. I mean, partnerships are great. They start with a partner, they get a joint venture, and from there they grow, they get the expertise, they grow their economy, they grow their workforce, and then they're able to bid on more opportunities. So some of these big businesses, like if you look at the Boucher Group in Fort McMurray, Tuckaroo Inc., these are privately held businesses. They started really small, but because the oil and gas helped them, mentored with them, they were able to grow, they're expanding. So I think the oil and gas is a really great area. Overall, I think all in Canada is starting to look more at Indigenous procurement. I mean, within our strategy supply chains, we have 65 companies that have joined us. The post-secondary institutions are another prime example. I mean, they're like small municipalities and they're looking at that. And I mean, I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Call to Action 92 on economics for Indigenous people to include us is really making a difference, and it's growing and growing. And I think for the most part, the oil and gas and the resource sector has led the way in Canada, and I think they will continue to do so.
Good, thank you. And just if you're following the chat, some comments in the chat too about certifications and partnerships and how that can be a positive influence. Bill, what about the construction industry? I mean, most of us have learned about Chandos today, so there's some shining examples out there, but super competitive industry. So I'm thinking it's probably not most companies.
I would say there's been an increasing awareness, and there are companies of all sizes that, you know, are engaged in different means. But I mean, construction is also the barometer of the economy. Most of our members in the mid to small, which 70% of our members are 10 people or less in the office. So they are very small organizations. And most of them are working at zero or negative margin right now to try and keep work in their organization that keeps their people busy in the economy we're in right now. And this is 4 years worth of that downward pressure. So when you're 10 people in the office and you're trying to hold on to them at all costs and you're taking work at break even, or more often than not nowadays, actually a loss. It's very hard to find the extra resources to go above and beyond when you literally don't know if you're going to be in business at the end of Q1 next year. And so there's a tear. And one of the other things that has occurred in one of the other provinces around social procurement is it became a means to position union employment as an exclusive part of their particular interpretation. That has put a lot of people's backs up and made people very nervous, and it's discredited the phrase. There's a few people that twitch at the phrase because they now associate it with the way it was utilized in that particular agenda, and that does not help the cause. Our industry builds communities, and it's a people business. Our industry is very, very aware. We hire about 10% of Albertans. 80,000 people in Calgary alone are employed in the construction industry. We are a big community, and we start people straight out of high school, and some of them end up presidents of companies. So, our industry has a huge opportunity. And I think the awareness that's growing, we're working on a committee at the City of Calgary who are looking at this. We're at the table, we're having the conversations. Our industry also solves problems for a living. And I think, and often again, against circumstances that are not easy. I do believe our industry will find ways to respond and contribute in a meaningful way, but it takes an ecosystem. It can't be industry led, because we take our orders from the bid process and the design and the specifications.
Thank you. I'm just keeping my eye on time. So next question, I guess if you, and I guess short responses to this next question, although I could talk about this forever. One big influencer on your industry, whether it's an industry association, investors, what would you say is a really key influencer on the players in your industry being, I'll just say, more responsible generally? Dinah, what would be one of the big influencers? I know we already mentioned World Gold Council, but any other just really big influencers in terms of raising the bar?
I think there's the International Cyanide Management Code and the requirements around responsible use of chemicals in mining. I think that would definitely be one. And then the market, right? I think the market investors and their drive towards sustainable development goals and investors and their focus on SDGs and responsible sourcing and everything else are definitely influential.
Thank you. Philip, what about the oil and gas industry? Big influencer for them.
Well, I think the big influencer for the oil and gas, and not just the oil and gas, but all corporations in Canada, is more awareness of Indigenous businesses and the causes. I mean, Indigenous people, we've struggled a long time. Like, for the most part, prior to even in the 1970s, Indigenous owned businesses on First Nations communities around were told you can't buy from that business if there's a business within the community that sells that. So we've been excluded so long, and I think we're getting out there more. There's more success that's coming out, and I think it's just more awareness that's coming for Indigenous peoples and the capabilities of our businesses. And I think the oil and gas has looked at that, but then again, a lot of it is also the duty to consult. I mean, we are rights-bearing peoples in Canada. We are constitutionally recognized, and we're making sure that we are being heard. And I think that's making a big difference in the oil and gas in all sectors.
Education and awareness. I encourage folks to go to the CCAB website. There's some good stories and education there as well to understand better. Bill, how about the construction industry? What would you say has the potential to influence change?
The next generation. That sounds a bit glib, and it maybe sounds like I'm passing the buck, but we're a very dyed-in-the-wool, traditional, a bit of an old school industry in some respects. And the energy that's coming from the leaders of the future. We have a young construction leaders group that we put together for that purpose. I believe they have the runway. They have a whole career ahead of them The rest of us are a bit tired. And they have energy, they have access to a way of thinking, and provided they can hold on to that and not get it trained out of them, the next generation will absolutely make the lasting difference for this industry.
Thank you. And I appreciate all of those responses, because in those responses, we've heard, education, we've heard, future generations, we've heard industry associations, we've heard investors. There's a lot of different, and we haven't even started with consumers, because that's a bit far removed in some respects from the industries that we're talking about, but there's a lot of different pressure points that people can be involved with. Well, we have hit 12:10, so I need to send people back to the main session, and you're going to see two links in the chat. One is to go back to the wrap-up session in Swap Card that starts at 12:10, and then there for students, there is a student Q&A happening at 12:30. So the links are in the chat. So please do those things. Having said that, if you did want to stick around just for a question or two, we'll hang out here a bit. And thank you, Philip, Bill, and Dinah, just for your honesty and for sharing your expertise. I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just give folks a second in case anybody does want to ask a direct question. Yvonne, I see you still hanging out with us. Yvonne is actually from Vermilion Energy. I would say also one of the oil and gas stars in this sustainability procurement space. Trying. It's tough right now, isn't it, Yvonne?
It is. We're certainly trying. We're at an early stage, and interestingly, that's one of the reasons why we're not saying very much, is because we actually want to put performance first. So yeah, our guys in the field are working hard, and to Philip's point earlier, we've had some good success in working with some of our potential partners with Indigenous firms to help them be more successful on the bids, and we're seeing some good success with that. Yeah.
Angie, the only other quick comment I had is, Bill, I really understand your comments. I was involved in a variety as a client with a variety of construction projects of different sizes. And I know in one where we in fact pre-hired, you make sense, the contractor, and they were part of the design process.
Yeah.
That really worked out. It was the best one I'd been involved in when we did that, because they were able to bring their creativity into the process.
It is, I've been in the industry nearly 40 years now, and I've seen design build, construction management, integrated project delivery, and without fail, the more collaborative a project is, and the earlier you hire the key players and stop bidding out your biggest partners, because the definition of lowest bidder is whoever made the biggest mistake. And quite frankly, as a former estimator and bidder, you sometimes make these mistakes deliberately because you need to be low, and then you look for opportunity after the fact, which creates just a terrible fallout from a bad decision. But yeah, you get your key stakeholders at the table, and you use their knowledge to help you better understand the unforeseen consequences of a decision that might have looked like a great idea. The contractor can often turn and say, now, if you do that, here's what's going to happen. You're like, oh, okay, I can make a more informed decision now. By the way, that partner was at the table in that early conversation. They can't play dumb later and go for a change order. So you also create accountability that lasts for the whole project.
That's great.
And a contractor could say, you know what? It may cost you more to hire this company, but I can save you money over here. Do you want to talk about it? And we've just found a way to fund the better solution. When you're doing a bid, you can't say that in your bid because you'll get disqualified.
Well, thanks everybody. I'm just posting the link in the chat to get back to the main session. Thank you very much, Bill and Dinah and Philip. You guys are just clearly experts in your industries, and I enjoy learning from you all. So
I did.
Thank
you all.
Thank you very much. It was awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you, Angie.
Yeah. Take
take
care.
care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.